Good afternoon, everyone. Respected Father Principal and Vice Principal. I think they are not here. And speakers of the day, Dr. Sandhya, Dr. Ruchira, and Advocate Jyothi Radhika, faculty members, and dear students. First of all, let me congratulate the Women's Cell of the East Campus of Sacred Heart College for organizing this program to discuss dowry culture and domestic violence. Also, thank you, Francis sir and Sarah, for inviting me to this, and Aishwarya for the welcoming words extended. Let me start with my own story. My parents were very particular that they wouldn't give their daughters in marriage to men or families that ask for dowry. And because of the awareness I had at that time, I went for a step ahead. I told my would be husband that I wouldn't be giving any dowry. And he said, I haven't asked for any. And I went as a bride with the minimum possible gold on me, not as a moving jewelry. I'm mentioning to the general marriage culture in Kerala. For the simplicity conveyed, some people might have laughed at us and or ridiculed us behind us, but not in front of us. Before leaving Kerala after 3 years of marriage, I saw at least 5 girls known to me starting their family through marriage, not as moving jewelries, but decorating themselves with confidence, education, job, and feeling of equality. This happened 25 plus years ago. I said this to affirm that daring steps matter and also the sparks you get matter. I got the courage to do that from the awareness I had from various discussions and knowledge about the culture that dehumanizes most of the girls in our society. The dowry culture involves the marriage market where people bargain to get more dowry, and that follows harassments, mental torture, murder, suicides. It is a reality around us, in our families, extended families, neighborhood, communities, everywhere around us. That means it is within us. The drops in the ocean matters a lot, but not enough for turning a prevailing system. Today we are discussing this, standing on the untimely ended tortured lives of many young wives of in their 20s. Vismaya, Suchitra, Archana, Arya, Priyanka, Tushara, Uttara, to name a few recent dowry related suicides and killings occurred in Kerala. Their lives tell us about the unending atrocities and the perpetrators in the family system. Today we are discussing this surrounded with the haunting echoes of the cries of so many wives and young girls that went unheard. As we all know, the revealed cases are substantially less than that are brought to limelight. I was recently reading a research paper on dowry among Malayali families migrated to Canada. We have made it a culture even after migrating to lands with no dowry system. As we heard in the prayer song today, we are in a darkness and we really need guidance. First thing is, let us talk about this. Boys and girls, let us all think about this very seriously. Let us have conversations on this in families, among student groups. To initiate a serious change, we need real empowerment. Where do we go for this empowerment? It starts from speaking about this, discussing and critically analyzing it. One of the student attributes of our college. Why don't the young wives feel that we have systems where they can go and complain? The topic says surviving domestic violence. I was a bit surprised. Why do we have to survive with domestic violence? Why don't we have the courage to say no, stop it, no more? Why do husbands and in laws feel that they can abuse and torture a woman? How do they demand for more dowry? Remember, don't misunderstand and connect equal share with dowry, and a husband is not the one to ask for the share. Our girls have to be empowered for that. Why don't the girls get equal places at their family husbands' houses? Why do the girls' parents compel their girl to adjust even when they come to understand about the torture their child is going through at her husband's place? Why the young wives and their parents don't seek help? Why not they seek help instead of submitting to domestic violence? The questions are many. Let us listen to the speakers of the day. As introduced, we have three noted guests, Dr. Ruchira Sen, Dr. Sandhya Ram, and Advocate Jyothi Vijayakumar. Dr. Ruchira will be speaking on the dowry system, to be specific, new dowry and capitalism. Dr. Sandhya will speak on the laws related to dowry prohibition and protection from domestic violence. Advocate Jyothi will be giving an overview on the socio-cultural and ideological context, as well as gender inequality paradigms that lead to domestic violence and dowry related atrocities. Now, over to Dr. Ruchira. Dr. Ruchira.
Ma'am, you are again on mute. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you, Professor Mathai, for your very inspiring words. And thank you, Sacred Heart College, for having me. A special thanks to Professor David for extending the invite. I would like to present I have a bunch of slides, and I apologize in advance if they are too wordy because, well, yeah, it is, it is basically part of my own research on dowry. I have been thinking about dowry for a very long time. I'm sure, like many women who are here right now, I've had friends who have been subject to dowry violence and dowry abuse. And Professor Mathai was talking about why do we survive, why do we not, why do we not resist dowry harassment. Most of us do. I don't know if some of you are familiar with a really nice novel by Meena Kandasamy called The Portrait of the Writer as a Young Wife. Um, it basically talks about a young woman from, very liberal families, actually, families like mine, like Professor Mathai's, who believed in girls' education, who believed that, girls should get out there, become writers, become journalists. And, Meena Kandasamy is one of the most important women writers of India today. But she herself found herself trapped in this cycle of domestic violence, and stepping out of it and going home to her parents was not particularly a very easy option for a number of reasons. Now, my training is in economics, and for a long time I have been, thinking about what are these economic institutions like marriage market, like uh, or socio-economic reasons why women cannot, why surviving is something difficult. It's not particularly easy to do. You know, partly I am subject to the same trap that many economists have, which is that we think that if something can be done, it will be done. Quite often, things cannot be done. Speaking of my own friend, not Meena, but my friend who will remain anonymous while I do this presentation, She was a purple belt in karate. Last I remember, I think she got her black belt, and that was how she managed to essentially resist the attempt to murder. Even now, in fact, when she filed her FIR against her husband, when her husband was arrested, when several people saw that FIR, they asked her just one question each time: "How did you get away?" And at that time she would not bring up that her black belt, because she thought that it would detract from the problem. She didn't want to let it be known that she was able to fight it, and she was able to resist someone murdering her, essentially. Nonetheless, over to looking at dowry. And because we are social scientists, one of the gifts that we have is that we are able to take ourselves out of a problem and then put ourselves back into it. So right now, for a while, let's take ourselves out of the problem and try to understand dowry. When you sometimes see some of the British colonist views on dowry, also some of the ideas of dowry which are prevalent in our law today, we don't often realize that dowry is not actually unique to India, which is why I was which is why I particularly want to appreciate the introduction in the beginning, which acknowledged that dowry is something which goes back many years and is not actually unique to India. It's not. It dates back to ancient Greek societies, to the early Roman Empire. Uh, Spanish and Portuguese colonists actually brought dowry practices to Mexico and Brazil, which did not exist earlier. British colonists are always in the archival documents very disgusted with marriage cultures in India. They say, "Oh, the weddings are so big in Hindu families. Uh, there so much jewelry is exchanged, etc., etc. Weddings are so big." But actually, even at that time in Britain itself, dowry gifts were quite prevalent. There's a very famous case study in 1972 by Pierre Bourdieu, who is a very well known sociologist. And he went down to the French Pyrenees, and he surveyed some of the aristocratic families who live there. And he found that dowry gifts are absolutely crucial, and they play a major role in marriage negotiations. There are many other institutions that are involved in marriage negotiations. There is birth order, there is inheritance, there is education. Um, while these factors play a role, dowry plays an even bigger role. Similarly, if you look at Polynesia towards the Australian islands, around Papua New Guinea, it is quite common that that dowry would take the form of an exchange. Usually, you would trade emblazoned matting. If you see the picture up towards the right, the higher picture, that's basically a very typical dowry gift. It would be an emblazoned matting that the bride's family would give to the groom's family, and the groom's families would make an reciprocal gift of some other kind of artisanship. The difference between these cases and India are quite a few. One is that both in the French case and in the Polynesian case, the dowry gifts are reciprocal. Both grooms and the bride's families are trading gifts. In the European cases, there are, dowry gifts are probably not necessarily non-reciprocal per se. I haven't really studied how dowry works in Mexico and Brazil yet. But generally, it is understood that dowry is a marriage gift and it is reciprocal. I give you something, you give me something. And yes, it was definitely a major part in marriage negotiations. For those of you who are studying sociology, if you've read a book called The Gift by Marcel Mauss, you will see that gifts in themselves are not really something that does not have value associated with it. They're not value neutral, they're not just gifts. They're not something that you give out of the goodness of your heart. Rather, they are an element of marriage or other kinds of negotiations. Like say you give someone something on Christmas, often there will be there will be a pressure on you that, oh, XYZ gave me something on Christmas, so I have to give that person something back. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because at one level it ensures some sharing, some exchange of gifts, some way of cementing a relationship. It's a kind of contract, and the gift can be quite token. It doesn't have to be something big. You don't have to give a child a Lego box set. You can give a child a pair of pants for Christmas, like a something that the child really needs, and that would be a gift which would have special significance. But when do these gifts become a problem? And that is where we come to dowry in South Asia. Dowry in South Asia has a very special significance because in Europe, these dowry gifts have become much less common. There are still wedding gifts, usually they have something called a wedding registry, and their friends get together and purchase them the gifts on their registry. But those gifts are not central to the contract. It's not that, if you don't get a Vitamix for your wedding, that you will say no to the wedding, or you'll say no to getting married to somebody, right? However, in India, these dowry practices have not only become universal, but they have also become a major factor behind marriage negotiations. There are surveys, slightly old ones, by Rao and a special UPenn study, which have found that most families make dowry gifts. Exchange of gifts on weddings is very, very common, right? And there has been an escalation in dowry gifts recently, according to work by Sirpa Tenhunen, where she says that, instead of token gifts, like, I knit a hat and I give you a hat as a present, instead of that, now there has become much more pressure to give money and market goods like cars, land plot for a house, a flat as dowry, right? So, yeah, so that is where we start to talk about the advent of these market processes into dowry, and why this starts to lead to a rise in violence against new brides. According to the 2016 calculations from the NCRB, the National Crime Records Bureau, 32.5% of crimes against women were cruelty by husband and his relations, typically in the form of requests for larger dowries. A student of mine did the same calculation again for 2019, and he found that the figure has actually gone up to 40%. And it's actually the most common crime against women. It's also surprisingly the most common crime by women. Janvi Sen, a journalist from The Wire, she was reporting on women's prisons in India, and she found that the most common cause of women being in prison was actually because of making dowry demands for their sons. Mothers-in-law going to prison. Now, until now, we have been, talking about dowry as a price on the marriage market. And even that notion is not particularly new. Like Gary Becker in 1981, he defined marriage as a market, and he understood dowry as a price within the market. There are a lot of other kinds of work like that, like Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, Moitrish Khatok, and other and a colleague of theirs. They wrote a very nice paper actually on marriage markets and caste in Bengal. There's a modeling of dowry motives again by Raj Arunachalam and Trevin Logan. These are all very influenced by this Beckerian tradition, which looks at marriage as a market and at dowry as a price within the market. And it's true, of course, that prices do help negotiate supply and demand of something, anything. In this case, it would be supply and demand of care labor, which is what is traded in a marriage market. However, this kind of methodology for thinking about dowry has a serious blind spot. You can say that marriage is a market, But has it always been a market? And does it really matter? Right. And that's why we have to start looking at dowry beyond markets. How do we do that? We adopt, according to Kalpana Khanal and I, where we wrote our paper, we adopt what is called a Polanyian perspective from the work of Karl Polanyi. Uh, this is a book which is a must read for all of you, and if you haven't read it already, which is called The Great Transformation. And most of Polanyi's work is basically about looking at economic arrangements in contexts outside of capitalism. Marriage is something that is not otherwise a part of the market per se. It's not, while we say groom price, while we say marriage markets where women are supplying themselves on the market, I mean, it's not all that marriage is. Marriage is much more than that. Rather, it is a very complex social contract where two parties come together. They constantly negotiate. Sometimes they're negotiating something as simple as who will take care of the child. I'm doing this session right now, which means that my husband is taking care of my child, right? And this is a part of the social contract of marriage. There are duties, responsibilities, and rights on all sides, and that contract has to be negotiated. Sometimes dowry becomes a negotiating factor or a negotiatory factor, but its roots are outside of this market system, right? It basically comes from systems of kanyadan, of varadikshana, and stridhan. Let's talk a little bit about kanyadan. Um, I think the in the introduction, the Manusmriti was mentioned. Kanyadan essentially stems from the Manusmriti, and Kanyadan is part of the reason why dowry is unidimensional or say non-reciprocal within the Indian tradition. In in the Manusmriti, I don't know, has anyone here read the Manusmriti? No? Well, I can't really see from here because I'm screen sharing, but feel free to turn on the mic and tell me if you've read the Manusmriti. I would fully endorse reading it. I do think you should burn it. You definitely should burn it, but read it first and then burn it. That's how it is with the Manusmriti. Manusmriti says that a girl who is nubile or is ready to, have is able to supply reproductive labor. A woman who is nubile is essentially a burden on a father. It is the father's duty to give his daughter up in marriage. So it's interesting. Many people think that dowry happens because of dowry, girls are a burden, and that's why they are not looked after by parents. But actually, it's the other way around. Dowry arises because girls are a burden. Girls are a burden because in the ancient scripture of Hinduism, in the law, it is laid down that girls are a burden. And fathers then are forced to divest themselves of that burden. In order to divest themselves of that burden, they then have to, you know, give gifts to, in some sense, compensate their son in law for taking the burden off their hands. It's almost like the Banaras Brahmins. This is an argument presented by John Parry of the London School of Economics. The Banaras Brahmins take on the burden of everybody's sin, and therefore they are constantly being given gifts which help sustain them. The Banaras Brahmins live on gifts. So similarly, the son-in-law becomes a recipient of gifts because girls are considered a burden in the Hindu scripture. So from a very beginning itself. Now that again would not really be a very big problem if these gifts are in the form of small tokens. A small necklace which isn't worth all that much, not a problem, right? A small, showpiece to keep in your home, not a problem. But when dowry becomes a substantial transfer of wealth from the bride's family to the groom's and becomes a major factor in negotiations, that's when the problem occurs. Srinivas, who is a scholar in 1984 when who writes on dowry, and he calls this system the new dowry. Now, Karl Polanyi understands non-markets as a double movement. Basically, what happens is that every time markets enter a non-market space, so markets are entering marriage, then there is a disruption of social bonds, right? Market forces are taking over non-market forces, and then non-market forces have to create laws to protect themselves. And this is what happened when the British started to enter into uh, enter into the South Asian continent. The British found that they want to institute, marriage. They wanted to institute market systems, and particularly enforce land titles in the name of modernity. They wanted to modernize land titles. Who owns what land and who is going to pay taxes on the land? In order to do that, they then had to understand the system of inheritance that arises from marriage. So when they looked at Hindu practices and they saw that there are different forms of marriage, there is something called a Brahma marriage, which is partly instituted by the Manusmriti. But the Manusmriti also puts into place several other forms of marriage. Now, the Brahma marriage is the dowry marriage. That the Brahma marriage is actually considered the highest form of marriage in the Manusmriti, and that is when the father faces the burden of a marriageable daughter, gives her up in marriage, decks her with jewels, and gives her as dan, kanya dan, into the son-in-law's house. That's the Brahma marriage. But there are many other kinds of marriage in the Manusmriti, like the Projapati marriage, which is essentially a love marriage. People say that love marriage is outside the Sanskriti of Hindu societies. That's not true. Prajapati marriage was instituted by the Manusmriti, and there is no dowry in a Prajapati marriage. Similarly, there is I think there's a Devik marriage, and then there is the Asura marriage, which the Manusmriti disallows. The Asura marriage doesn't have dowry, it actually has bride price. And the Manusmriti is absolutely horrified by that. But that could also partly be because it was practiced by non-Hindu societies, and the Brahmins of yore could not accept it. So now, when the colonists came to India and they wanted to, establish property rights over land, then they also had to recognize a system of inheritance, and that meant that they had to understand how Hindu marriage works. So they only understood Brahma marriage and they instituted that. So in the laws of that time, they only recognized Brahma marriage as Hindu marriage. Whereas there were many other types of Hindu marriage which were completely erased from the legal understanding of marriage. Right. Okay, so and through these processes, where they were trying to set up land titles, another problem that the colonists created is that they created this very homogeneous society based on peasants owning land, and usually it would be male peasants owning land. Even today, when we think about the farmer, we think about the male farmer. We don't think about women farmers, right? Similarly, because the British had their own cultural and gender biases, they understood land ownership as masculine. And because they understood land ownership as masculine, they ended up masculinizing an economy where women were actually quite active. So now suddenly women cannot hold property. Suddenly the women are forced to pay dowry because only the Brahma marriage is legal. Suddenly love marriages are no longer a thing. Suddenly other types of Devik marriage are no longer a thing. And already these roots of considering women a burden are there in the Manusmriti, But the colonists come in and start compounding that problem, and and they do it because of a capitalist uh, incentive, because essentially they want to commodify land and make land easily tradable and exchangeable. Veena Talwar Oldenburg, this is a very nice book called Dowry Murder, and she calls it Reinvestigating a Cultural Whodunit. Essentially, she talks about the institution of dowry as a detective mystery. And Oldenburg basically understands that, dowry itself has a changing relationship. What was once token payments become much more. It becomes demands for land, it becomes demands for cars, as in the recent case. um, and that means that women then start losing their rights to wealth, to property, to their children. And because women are then stepping further and further out of the economy and are no longer being recognized as owners of property, uh, then they are seen more and more as a burden, and thereby fathers are under more and more pressure to pay dowry. Now, as Kalpolani said, that when there is pressure to build a market, like when markets pressurize you, then mostly you will try to hit back at the markets by developing institutions. Usually, most of us build laws to prevent markets from destroying our lives. So, one way in which we tried to build a law to deal with this dowry problem was the Hindu Code Bill in early 1950. As soon as independence comes, legislators realize that it is time to reform some of these devastating Hindu practices, and they come up with the Hindu Code Bill. But they created a loophole because they couldn't really understand, or they didn't really understand why dowry is a problem. They said families can still give gifts during marriage, right? As long as it's not excessive in financial value. But that's the problem, right? How do you determine how excessive financial value is? Even in the 19th century, when Catherine, Portuguese princess, marries Charles II of Britain, her dowry includes the island of Mumbai, which might not be excessive to, I guess, the Portuguese king, but might be excessive to us. Similarly, the idea of excessive gets, completely messed up. So this basically created a loophole, and dowry practices continued. They just said, hey, it's just a gift. And then that meant that essentially dowry only becomes a problem when someone dies and when there is domestic violence. And that's why the legal system basically developed a new law, essentially, where they developed a new criminal law act in 1983, where they began to start taking dowry cases as under cruelty by husband or relatives of husband, and that became a punishable offense. Right. Okay, now of course comes the biggest question of everything, which is what today's panel is about, and I'm going to leave much of this for the other speakers. How do we resist this cruelty on account of dowry? Because until now, we basically understood that dowry really only becomes a legal problem when somebody dies, when somebody faces domestic violence. But how do we ensure that deaths and domestic violence do not happen? It would have to be a non-legal solution. It would have to be a cultural or a socio-economic situation which has to step into place before a legal problem ensues. And that means that we have to understand that gift itself is a tool of negotiation and coercion. So in a marriage negotiation, if gifts are being demanded, that itself is a red flag. Right? That's the first. Secondly, you know, secondly, there is this arranged marriages itself are, of course, an issue, like this obsession with the Brahma marriage system where dowries have to be paid and negotiations have to be made in this way. So that's also something that we need to start pushing our culture away from. I would say push for more love marriages. If there are young boys and girls who find one another in college, instead of making it difficult for them to maintain a relationship, as educators um, make we should enable uh, boys and girls to get to know one another and develop relationships. Love marriages are inherently a progressive system. By the way, these are just my views. They do not, uh, they're not anywhere else. But also, there are economic institutions that we need to develop. One is that we need to recognize women's labor, when so that we don't see women as a burden, such that dowry has to be paid when a family, takes when a family accepts her into their fold. So that means that we have to recognize women's labor and women's value, and that could be done in numerous ways. One is that we need to reverse the falling female labor force participation, ensure safer working conditions, social expenditure on health, creches, family welfare, better systems to prevent violence against women at the workplace, make workplaces comfortable for women, make it easier for men and women to interact with one another as equals in workplaces, in colleges, in social institutions. And yeah, I mean, I would say, of course, uh, you know, um, try to rearrange how we love and how we marry. Thanks for listening to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ruchira. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. So, she has taken us for a journey through various papers and actually gave us an insight on this marriage, this dowry as a marriage negotiation. So, that and how to look at this issue with an economic lens, no? So how to see it in that perspective. So it was a wonderful presentation and how to resist these cruelties. So and she ended with some points on that too. So let us come back for discussions later, questions and discussion at the end of all the three presentations. So let me now request Dr. Sandhya to take over.
Thank you, Shanti. Good afternoon, everyone. Much appreciate the organizers for letting us sit together and think about the real issues and probably triggering a change process. And thanks to dear Nasneen for the invite. And I'm glad to connect with Sacred Heart. Krishnendu, your rendering was beautiful and soothing. And I wish that the whole world is happy as you have sung very nicely. And thanks, Ria, also. Thanks to everyone. To start with, I think today's session is a reflection of us acknowledging once again that dowry and domestic violence are real problems that need real solutions. At the root of these issues lies some wrong notions about a woman, her position, and her roles. So the correction has to happen from that very place. And unless and until we correct those wrong notions, it is not possible to bring in any change, no matter what law or which law is enacted. Because law alone cannot bring in a social reform the way we expect it to. There is a social engineering task which is there for the law to play, and social involvement, meeting of minds, changing of mindsets. In short, corrections, and corrections alone can bring in this change. So these underlying wrong notions regarding dowry and domestic violence, to my mind, are threefolded: gender discrimination, commodification of women, and violence against women. We must think about why this happens. Why does this happen? Here we have to think back about the gender connotations and also the difference between sex and gender. Sex is a biological difference between men, women, and transgenders. It's just a biological fact, whereas gender is about a cultural and social construction of responsibilities, of privileges, of roles, of expectations, of relations. And in fact, it's about drawing and or carving or molding two separate spheres for the men and for the women. And all these are founded or built on patriarchal norms, be it Manusmriti or be it the times of Aristotle. Everywhere, misogyny has been there, and misogyny is nothing but historically transmitted hatred towards women. Uh, some might say that in India, women are worshipped like goddesses. But the fact is that either women are raised above human level and place them at the stage of a goddess or a god, or lower them to little less than humans. And what I, as a woman, and I hope all of you as women, need is humanhood, not the devihood. And it's definitely not the below humanhood or Aristotle's time, the slavehood, as we could call it. And all this form of sex discrimination, it has facets at different levels of our life. One is a societal prejudice. All of you know the story or the saying about whether a needle falls or a thorn falls on a leaf, it's always a leaf which gets damaged. So the stigma which is attached to a woman coming out, it's about the woman losing her dignity, uh, and not the perpetrator losing his. So this notion prevents the women to come out and to speak up. And societal prejudice is always there, throwing aspersions on the chastity of a woman, uh, if she's daring or honest, or if she decides to live her life. And at workplace, moving from societal prejudice, let's just focus on workplace, because all of us are now at work. There is the sex discrimination which could be there many a time, directly or very, very subtly, that it becomes difficult to even notice. And after work, we reach home, and there the discrimination manifests in the form of domestic violence. And all this is because of the power equation which we are used to. And what is there in the society will reflect at the home level, domestic level, and what is there at home goes back to the society. It is a vicious cycle. So we cannot say that it's because of the society that it happens at home. It could also be it's because it's one and the same. It's just a unit, as you know. And the basis of this social construct of misogyny is evident from every sort of literature or historical, political theories. If you look at it, it is reflected in sayings and in proverbs and in the way in which women are overprotected also. Manusmriti, I'm not quoting, everybody knows that a woman does not deserve freedom, is what Manu has written. And in the Shabarimala judgment of the Kerala High Court, not the final one, in the Kerala High Court judgment, the court terms from Manusmriti, in fact, to justify stopping women from entering the temple. And the text, what I remember is that a man who is taking that vrat to go to Shabarimala for 40 days or so has to refrain from few evils like alcohol, meat, and along with it, lust, and along with it comes a woman. So that is exactly what Manu has categorized, and that is what is even cited in the arguments to get an order that women should not enter Shabarimala temple. And Aristotle has said that women, children, and slaves are deliberately deficient, and lacks practical wisdom. Aristotle never considered women as equal to men. He categorized them as lower to men and little above slaves. And there are even sayings where he says that it's very difficult to get a slave, so better get a woman, or get a wife at home, rather. So these indoctrinations, belief systems, which are many a time backed with religions and scriptures, it is vis-a-vis these that we are fighting. And women themselves do not or are unable to realize the discrimination and subordination that they are subjected to. For example, we all have heard about glorification of Sita as a Sarvam Saha. Women need to forgive. Husband is God. Worship and serve the husband. It's okay for a man to beat his wife. It's after all once in a while. It's after all just a slap. You must have seen thappad. It's just a thappad. That thappad is loaded with misogyny. That's what we fail to realize. That's what we fail to correct. It is in such a context that we need to look at the laws which are existing and their relevance as well as their shortcomings. Laws have a lot of shortcomings, not at all proper, especially the Dowry Prohibition Act. But then these are the things which need to be corrected by a writing of a law, which becomes very difficult unless the societal mindset changes. So taking you quickly to the two legislations, which is my task, Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961, I will avoid legal jargon and just throw light on this is what the law says about dowry as also about domestic violence. Dowry Prohibition Act is a very ineffective legislation according to me. And the very purpose of this act, which was passed in 1961, is to prohibit giving or taking of dowry. Nothing has happened, shows the inefficiency of it. And what is dowry is defined. It means property or valuable security which is given. From one side, it is gender neutral as far as the dowry definition is concerned. It is given by one party to the marriage to another party or the parents of either party. It goes like that. But it should be in connection with marriage. And there is an exception which is given here, that is giving of mahar or giving of dower in the case of Mohammedan community, because it comes under the Shariat and the personal law. That is not considered to fall within the definition of dowry. Otherwise, giving of property or valuable security is considered to be dowry. And penalties prescribed for giving and taking dowry, like 5 years minimum imprisonment and minimum fine of 15,000. Let's leave all that. But then let's focus on the exceptions. Even though this is made an offense, certain things will not come or which are not punishable, like gifts given at the time of marriage to the bride or to the groom without any demand. But there's a condition that whatever gifts are received by the bride or by the groom must be entered in a list, and this list must be signed by both of them. It is ridiculous. No other enforcement mechanism. Make a list and give as much as you want. But the thing is that you should not demand. This is more than enough to defeat whatever has been cited before, and even the very title of the statute, Dowry Prohibition Act. Because these are things which happen within four walls and very difficult to control with such legislations. And if any gifts are given of a customary nature, which is part of the, which is required as part of the custom during a marriage, that again falls outside the purview of dowry, which would fetch a punishment. But however, it should be proportionate to the financial status of the parties. Whether the gift is expensive or not need to be checked. But who will check it? I do not really know. And again, certain points to know are that agreement to give dowry or to take dowry is not a good agreement. It cannot be enforced. It's considered to be void. And dowry, which is received by a man on behalf, or a dowry which is given, supposed to be enjoyed by a woman, and if it is given to the man, he has to transfer it to the woman within 3 months. And it goes like that. And any violation of these would become an offense, and it becomes a punishable offense. And whenever a person is charge sheeted, law is becoming a bit stringent now. If a person is charged for having committed an offense under this act, he has to prove that he has not done this offense. Usually we know that whenever police charges, police has to prove that the person has committed the offense. This is called burden of proof. So here the burden of proof is on the party who is accused that he has not done this. And some officers are appointed under the act, supposed to be appointed under the act called Dowry Prohibition Officers. In Kerala, it is in 3 regional prohibition officers, dowry prohibition officers are appointed, Trivandrum, Thiruvananthapuram, Kochi and Kozhikode. But I think the posts are not functioning as of now due to their own reasons, known better to them. And after the Vismaya incident, there is a helpline number which is announced for such cases as well. Now, when it comes to women and domestic violence, the domestic violence may or may not be in connection to dowry, but ultimately it all comes from the status that is given to a woman and to the roles which are given to her. And domestic violence happens out of the very social context of man being superior and that the woman has to forgive and all that. And this is a historical injustice that has been happening always. Women are given a relegated position. Gender discrimination does happen, and it manifests sometimes, many a time, as violence against women and violation of her human rights itself. Now, this domestic violence, the law relating to it is the Domestic Violence Act of 2005. Here, the law it's more useful, or it can be used in a number of times to the benefit of the woman concerned. It is in fact to protect the constitutional rights, the very fundamental rights granted under the Constitution, that this act has been enacted in 2005, because women who are victims of violence of any kind within the family need to be protected. So this law need to be understood quickly. Who is protected? Only women are protected, not men, in the case of domestic violence. Against whom am I protected? I'm protected against an adult male person with whom I have a domestic relationship. Domestic relationship need not be just marriage. It could be by adoption, it could be consanguinity, it could be even living together like husband and wife would make it a domestic relationship. And sometimes a woman is protected against another woman also, if it is a case of a marital relationship or living in the nature of a marital relationship, where the husband or the man's relatives, women, they can also be charge sheeted, they can also be prosecuted for committing domestic violence. And from what is she protected? She is protected from domestic violence, which means we need to again understand quickly about what amounts to domestic violence. Keep in mind that if for example, a woman does works as a domestic help at home, and if any violence is committed against her, it is not a matter which would come under Domestic Violence Act, because she is not a member of the family and she does not share a domestic relationship with the perpetrator or with the accused person. So it has to be that between the woman complainant and the respondent, there has to be a domestic relationship. So what amounts to domestic violence? Harming the person physically, mentally, sexually, emotionally, any form of abuse would amount to domestic violence. It could be direct attack on the safety, life, and well-being, or it could be verbal and emotional ridiculing, insulting. All this could even fall under the category of sexual abuse, or it could also be economic abuse. I'm earning, but then my ATM or my card is with the man at home, and I'm not given the freedom to use it. This is a clear case of economic abuse. Or I have certain funds, or I'm given some funds by the man and he withdraws it. Or he probably sells off the property which otherwise I would also have got to my disadvantage. All this could come under the category of economic abuse. Or threatening a woman, or harassing a woman, or even her family members or another person in the context of demand for dowry. All this amounts to domestic violence. So in the case of domestic violence, what is to be done is, legally what need to be done is, a woman can inform, or her friend, another person can inform protection officers who are appointed in all the districts. And if you go to a social welfare department's website, you get the link where all the protection officers places and their phone numbers are listed out. These are numbers which could be used. Or there is a list of NGOs who are designated as service providers. All NGOs are not service providers. Some NGOs are recognized as service providers for the purpose of domestic violence law. So they can be approached. So through them, the matter could go to the magistrate court. Or directly, the woman can approach the police also. So it's protection officers, service providers, or the police officer. Once you go to them, what they need to do is they have to prepare a domestic incidents report that this violence has happened. They have to prepare a report. Then an application has to be made, and the application has to be made to the magistrate. Once it reaches the magistrate is the authority who will pass an order. And I would like to emphasize and make it very, very clear that Domestic Violence Act is not a criminal law. It gives only civil remedies. So do not think that for committing domestic violence, a person can be jailed. It is not so. The remedies are in the nature of different orders that I would seek from the magistrate. So when I make an application to the magistrate, I have to mention what are the specific orders that I want. The orders are like monetary relief. It could be a residence order that I have a right to stay in that house. I cannot be evicted. More than that, he can be stopped from entering that part of the house or even that house itself, because I need to live there safely. And custody orders of the child temporarily, protect compensation orders for any injuries, mental torture, etc. And most importantly, protection order. So this protection order would mean that stop domestic violence is a nature of protection order. If I do not want him to contact me over phone, that also can be part of protection order. Do not visit me, do not trouble me in any manner, can be part of protection order. Now, how this civil remedy transforms to a criminal remedy is that once I obtain a protection order from a magistrate and the respondent violates the protection order and commits domestic violence again, then that becomes an offense for which he can be charge sheeted. An FIR can be filed. Now it becomes a criminal case between the state and him. But initially, when I go under Domestic Violence Act, I am not going to imprison one of my family members. I am going for protection or monetary or residence order, etc., as are listed out in the Act. And it is important that between the woman who is aggrieved and the man, they must share a domestic relationship. And to have a domestic relationship, they must have a shared household at some point of time. They must have been living together in a household at some point of time. It could be a rented house, it could belong to him or her, it could be joint family house, etc. These are few definition parts which are required so that your case can clearly fall within domestic violence law and a woman would get the protection under that. Now, this is a brief outline of what is provided in the two statutes. The question which we need to think about and address is, law has got many loopholes. It's known. Is this law going to be a total paradigm shift? Because where do we require transformation? We do not want women to be kept on a high pedestal, nor do we want them to be caged. We want them to be free. We want them to have free choice. We want them to exercise their free consent and take decisions. So the change has to come in every walk of life. We do not understand, because even if I would think that I am a feminist, I may have many ingrained indoctrinations which I take time to realize because it's generations old. We do not realize it at the first instance. And in the guise of trying to correct these notions and to set right these points, do not overdo also, because you have to keep a balance. That is your discretion, that is your wisdom. I'll give you an example which I came across at a domestic circle when few women assembled. One person had, one woman had come, woman is a better word, one woman had come to the house, met these relatives and went back. The moment she left, what was told to me is that she had a second marriage. A woman is associated with a marital status and her whole history is revealed by other women at home or in that circle. And I responded. I could have kept quiet. I responded politely that it doesn't matter because you do not speak about a woman's husband as a first husband. So if you need not point out that this is her first marriage, you need not point out second marriage also because it is totally irrelevant. And then I thought to myself, this woman who had come, she occupies a very high designation as an officer. They are identifying her not with her education or her designation, but with her marital status. This happens all around us, or things like these happen all around us at different points of time. We must decide to get it corrected in our thought process, and we have to be vocal sometimes, need not fight with people, but we have to keep a stand because at least 2 out of the 5 women might think once. Because I noticed that sudden realization was there in somebody's eyes because that knowing to respect a woman's privacy is very, very important. So even casual conversations onwards. Another example which I came across again last week, because there was some function at home for which there was a funeral at home, because of which I had to meet few people, of course, double masked. So this time, what I heard was that the complaint was made against a woman saying that she does not cook because she's working. There are so many women who work and who cook and serve for the husband. So the, it's a poor boy. He does not get food to eat, and she's not taking care of home. She does she not know that she is supposed to cook and serve her husband? Here again, after the conversation was over, I said, let us just teach all our boys, our sons, cooking because it's a life skill, just like swimming. After all, they might be working or they might be having money, doesn't matter. Ultimately, if they don't know to cook, they have to depend on another human being to eat 3 times a day. How shameful that is. So let them learn to cook. This sort of corrections, if you try to do, at least you will get yourself corrected. And sometimes you realize you have not thought about it. Like yesterday, my son was mentioning about the haircut. In these days, lockdown times, children grow their hair, boys. And school rules and all that was in conversation. And it was told to me that for boys, it should be above the collar, and for girls, they can grow, but they have to tie it. Even it's like that everywhere. Suddenly I just thought, why is it so? Why is it that a woman, a girl, because there the gender roles come. She can grow hair because she has to be beautiful. Nobody's stopping her from cutting the hair, of course. That's there. But then the notions, this is how the notions pass. So very many places that is we are living upon it, and we need to take effort to correct it ourselves, correct it wherever we come across it, and also pass it to the next generation. If we have children, not necessary. If we have children, we have to. If we when we are teaching as teachers, we come across a lot of students or friends anywhere, wherever corrections are possible, we need to correct it. And women have to be into policy making because policy makers and implementers are many times insensitive, as we know now recently. Once again, we are sensitized towards insensitivity of people who are at hand. Even judges many times have been insensitive. There are many, many examples for that. So we should try to build a world which is not close to women and not just focus on a matter of dowry. This is a reflection, this is a tip of a huge, huge iceberg. So correction need to be done from the root level, and it is a march ahead. And we must definitely look forward to that world which is open to all women and where she's treated equally with everyone. She has a space, and not a separate space, a space where she can do what she wants to do. So this change in societal and individual perspectives is a must, and be the change you wish to see. I am trying my level best to. Thank you all for listening. Over to
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Dr. Sandhya, for the insightful, very insightful presentation. And you have tried to give in detail both the statutes related to this Dowry Prohibition Act and the domestic Violence Prevention Act in a nutshell, actually. And you went beyond that, explaining well how difficult the task, this social engineering task, to reverse these notions and belief systems that determine the society and its actions, and how this task of reversing this misogynic uh, uh, conceptions, that is a real big task. Thank you so much. So let's have more discussions later. To carry forward, let me invite Advocate Jyothi.
Thank you, Shanthi ma'am. I'm happy to have listened to Dr. Ruchira Sen and Dr. Sandhya. And, thank you, Nasmeen, for welcoming, for the invitation to the program. And there was, the students who have talked about, I can see one Sara and Gayatri on the screen, nobody else. So welcome you all. And it was really a learning experience to listen to what Dr. Ruchira has talked about the dowry system in detail. And Sandhya ma'am, thank you for giving that insight into the social conditioning in a patriarchal social system. That is very important, because when there are only laws, you can't bring in change. And I am not an academician like both of them, not very thorough into the technical things of it, but I'll tell you what is my eligibility to talk about this, because I have had the experience of being part of different fields like print and visual media, corporate sector. Then I'm a civil service trainer. Then I practiced a bit. Then I'm also associated with politics. So different male-dominated fields. And also I'm a single mother taking care of my child since he was born. So at the personal level also, and in different professions also, and a little bit academically also, I've had the privilege of understanding what this is all about and fighting patriarchy at the personal level, and also whichever space I am privileged to be in, that has become a life mission for me. So when we speak about these things, beyond the academic perspective, I feel that, how many students, I don't know how many students are here, how many boys are here, how many girls are here. You should, take a pledge today, because this is not just a seminar for us. This is not just a conversation for us. We are talking about the lives of millions of women. Dismaya is not just a Facebook post subject for us, a clubhouse topic discussion for us, just not a subject for our webinar. This is the life. This is a real life many women are living. So whoever is present here as students, girls and boys, both of you should, be determined that I should do. Like Sandhya ma'am ended saying that be the change that you want to be. Definitely. If you don't do that, if you're not determined to do that, there's no point in talking or listening or being part of the webinar today. So I wish that all of you understand the depth and seriousness of the subject and think about it in detail. So I'm going to talk basically about how in practices, the gender socialization that we practice at our home and the patriarchal system, both of these things are, reaffirming the practices, are instrumental in continuing the practice of dowry. And why are we not bringing in any change, especially in a society like Kerala, which is, Kerala model of development. Everybody talks about Kerala, and you see so much of dichotomy, so many contradictions in the way you understand, you experience a woman's life in Kerala society. High education, but we have the lowest female participation rate. And we have high incidences of suicide, high incidences of domestic violence. And we have very little women compared to men, very little women in our public sphere. Have you thought about these contradictions? And these things happen continuously. I remember last year we were writing about Uttara. I was so emotional when I wrote about it. But then we forgot, including me, we forgot about her after 3-4 days. And when Vismaya came, we again started writing. I don't know whether you agree with me. And then we'll forget Vismaya in another 4-5 days. This should not happen. And all of of us, among the 39 or 40 among here, among us here who are here, if 10 decide to change, 10 decide to bring in some change in your life, it's going to create a big impact in the society that we are living. And first thing, when I talk about dowry culture, what is culture? Culture in sociology, we say it's something which is it's a sum total of the beliefs and practices that we have as a society, and it keeps on changing. It is dynamic. Despite we are having gender discourses, it is not very early. It is not like we have had for many, maybe not even 100 years, not 100 years. Maybe in India, it became very evident during the end of 1970s and all. We've had so many discussions. We are having continuing discussions. There are changes. Some point in some pockets, changes are happening, but still these practices continue. As like Dr. Ruchira talked about it in the beginning, it is like dowry system has got well adapted to the capitalist system and the consumerist culture that we practice in Kerala. I feel one thing, like when I talk, I would like to be, it is like, I would like it to be change oriented so that the men, girls and boys who are part of this, webinar, they would understand it in a better manner and try to bring in a change in your life. For example, see, in Kerala, because of the consumerist culture that we have a very flawed notion of success. At the age of like 30 plus, a woman should have all those things. You should have a house, you should have a car, you should even marriage is part of that notion of success, tangible material thing. You should show society that you have 2 kids, you have this husband. That is why this guy was so obsessed about his car. You want to show everyone that you have this kind of success, and nobody asks you, those people who are fitting into these parameters, are they really happy? Are you able to live as your own self? Have you found any meaning for your life? And on all those criteria, people judge me as a complete failure because I'm not part of an organized family, a conventional family system, conventional marriage, conventional religion, and conventional academic or conventional job. People think that, oh, she has failed in life completely. And people come to you and say, they're very sympathetic. That has to change. What is the notion of success? You go beyond the stereotypes of success, and their marriage becomes an essential thing for you to follow. Yeah, you have to be married, and your marriage has to be like this. And why do you have this ostentatious wedding? There is such an ugly display of wealth in Kerala, because you have to show everyone. You have to get social status. And I feel so sad because you are spending crores and rupees. Only COVID has put a restriction into this. And your sole purpose. If you have a girl child, your life's primary mission is to get her married and amass as much as gold ornaments for her. And you have jewelry ads, and you have this girl dressed up like nothing organic, nothing real in her. Such a stereotype. It is like a jewelry ad. So every girl, your advertisements reinforce this thought in your mind that every girl has to be like that. You don't think about women who can't afford even one sovereign. You don't think about the class factor in it. You don't think about the caste element in it. And when you think about women, you can't think about women as a monolithic entity, because according to the religion, according to the region where they live, according to the caste, according to class, there are different kinds of subjugations they are subjected to. For example, what a Dalit woman faces is completely different from what an elite upper class woman faces, upper caste woman faces. There are different ways they're subjected to different kinds of violence in a patriarchal society. So we don't try to understand these things, and we create a monolithic, a unidimensional, a stereotypical understanding, a model for women. And all the girls and boys who are born in, and the same way, we do that for boys also. Like Dr. Sandhya talked about gender socialization at home. So the way we bring up, I'll come a bit in detail into that. So first thing I wanted to tell you is that our culture, dowry system has got so adapted to our culture. And, when we discuss sociology in that, one sociologist, Yogendra Singh, talks about in India, we haven't replaced our traditions with modernity, but we have, in a way, modernized our traditions. Whatever caste has got adapted to democracy, and dowry has got adapted to the system. And so the capitalist consumerist culture. So I have a request that the students who are here, you should have serious rethinking about the consumerist culture and the notion of success. Why do you live? What's the purpose of your life? Do you just live to please the society fitting into those parameters? And the second thing, like she talked in detail about two laws, but why are they not becoming Dowry Prohibition Act? It is, there is no use of having that law. Why? Because internalization has to happen. Institutionalization, when a legislation is being enacted, there is institutionalization. Along with that, internalization has to happen. Supreme Court, verdict, Shabrimala verdict. You saw what was the protest in Kerala against women entering. Even if a legislation is there, because there is no change that is happening because there is no internalization. We are so much conditioned by the patriarchy, both men and women, in equal manner. We are all agents of patriarchy, most of us. Like Dr. Sandhya said, we are trying to change. I am trying to change, but it's a continuous correction till as long as you live. Sometimes you don't understand what patriarchal notions are there in your mind. And so when it comes to that, so this has to happen. This is the same thing with domestic violence. I remember reading a survey a few years ago in one of the major Malayalam dailies in Kerala, which said that most of the women, more than 50% of the women in Kerala said, what is wrong with domestic violence? It's natural for a man to beat his wife. There's nothing wrong. The problem is we have normalized dowry. We have normalized domestic violence. What is wrong with it? You need to think that there is something absolutely wrong with it. How do you think so? Why don't we think that this is wrong? Because of the gender sensitization. Please think about your families, how you're brought up. The time, even in Kerala, when we have the highest sex ratio in the country, 1,000 plus women, that is consistent. But when a male baby is born, there's so much of happiness. And the way you give your children the toys, whatever toys we give them, and the colors that you choose for male baby and female baby. And when a girl is little born, you tell a little grown up, and she is able to internalize and understand something, you tell her. This is known as gender sensitive socialization. You tell her, you socialize them in gender roles, tell that you have to go to some other house. So you need to cook. You don't need to cook to survive, but you need to go to another house and you need to adjust and compromise. And the same way, that boy who's and after 6 o'clock, she's not allowed outside home to protect her for her safety. At the same time, the boy is, so the girl has always a feeling of alienation. I'm not here. This is not my home. I have to go somewhere. That prayogam, like, I don't know whether Dr. Sandhya is aware of, like, marry off. You send her, and we have sent her off. So that girl has a feeling of alienation. And when she goes here, especially if she doesn't have a job, if you are not living here, according to our terms and conditions, we'll send you back there. Then your parents say, don't come back. Now that is your home. So where is the woman? What is her space ultimately? Where does she have a sense of belonging? So throughout your life, you are living in a continuous state of alienation. You don't have a sense of belonging anywhere. When you're here, you say you have to go there. When you are there, they say, if you are not the perfect wife that we want you to be, you will be sent back. So that has to change. And I feel it amazing that people talk of marriage only as an institution of compromise and adjustment. They don't talk of it as a partnership. Where do you want companionship? There is a give and take in marriage. And we train only our girls to get adjusted. We don't ask boys to get adjusted. We never tell the boys that you will find a partner in your life after some time. You should get adjusted to that person. Never. Adjustment is only the burden and responsibility of the girl. And after 6 o'clock, for the girl's safety, you will ask the girl not to go outside. We are protecting you. You will never train the boy not to misbehave with a girl who is seen outside after 6 o'clock. So everything is focused on, and we bring up our boys as with a notion of toxic masculinity. Boys can't cry, boys can't be vulnerable, boys can't express their fears. They have to be all tough and macho. And the girl should find solace in that protective macho man. This is love, and romance is also like understood this way. Girl, who there is a savior for me, protector for me, and he'll take care of me. This is the way you get girls. Many girls get romantically involved and they get exploited, and they get lured into marriage also this way. So I think the first thing, because of all those things, dowry is normalized. Because marriage is the most important thing. Marriage is it is something, the amount of gold that you give, that is what determines your status in society. That will determine your achievement in society, your success in society, and that will also accord your girl, your child, a very, what you call, a normal space, a dignified space in the husband's house. This is how we have conceptualized dowry. So if it has to change, our thinking has to change. And this is also the result of what happens at work. Like she was mentioning, what happens at work, what happens in a cyberspace, and what also happens in a public, public platforms and public discourse and public spaces. It is like at work, first, woman as a multitasker. This cliche I'm so tired of. Woman can do everything. And at home, you have this gender roles. Even if the woman is working equally as the husband, she has to do cooking. Boys are not trained to do that. And it is not equal if both are working also. Many working women have absolutely no control over the money that they earn. And in sectors like corporate sector, media, politics, etc., a woman cannot survive most often. There are many instances where women cannot survive without appropriating their sexuality. Many are not trained to treat women as equals. If a woman wants to talk, they think that, okay. And the way man-woman relationship is seen is only in one way. I tell about these things from my experience. Especially in Kerala, this has to change a lot. For example, when I did translations, there was a comment. Despite being a woman, she did it. What being a woman has to do with another skill that I had? Nothing. So everything that you do is connected to being a woman, your gender identity, your gender sensitivity. So the thing I need to, I feel that, there is, I think, little time. So if I summarize, if I want to tell you what we should do is, first thing, girls and boys, the way you are treated at home, in schools also, in colleges also. There are many schools who punish boys by making them sit with the girls. We don't encourage healthy man-woman relationship, healthy relationships between boys and girls. There are many boys who have no idea regarding menstruation. And menstruation is considered something so, what you say, you have to hide it. The way you buy your napkins from the medical shop or the grocery stationery shop, you have to hide it and cover it and bring it home. Because there is something unusual, abnormal about it. This has to change. Boys have to get sensitive about it. And the society has to understand, parents and teachers have to understand that there is not only, what you call, a kind of romantic involvement. Even if romantic involvement is there, if they are in the age of their choice, why do you interfere? It's very, very important. So the thing is that what should we do? So what I was trying to tell you is that dowry and domestic violence are prevalent. Despite the sensitization and also the legislation, because we have a culture endorsing it. We have a culture normalizing it. Why is it not changing? It is not changing because at the individual, most often the modernity we talk about is so hypocritical. The family that we hail as an institution is a patriarchal institution. One sociologist called Tarkat Parsons said, family is for child socialization and adult personality stabilization. But feminist sociologists corrected it and criticized it, saying that it is just for male personality stabilization. That woman is a safety valve there to absorb the emotional trauma or difficulty in the labor market, in the capitalist system, which the man is undergoing. So institutions like family and marriage have to become equal. Our concept towards this have to change, and the way we see men and women. For women, girls, how many girls are here? You please understand that your marriage is not the fulcrum of your life. You don't have to be defined by your marriage. I am a single mother, but I have, that is not that is only just one aspect of my life. That is not something that defines. That is not something that defines my identity. I am a human being. I am an individual, and I work. I am a professional. That has to be respected. That has to be internalized. Second thing, girls, you need to learn, to say no. Boys and girls, you need to know what is consent. And when we talk about domestic violence, we need to talk also about marital rape. We think that that is normal. Girls should know that nobody has a right over your body. Domestic violence or marital rape, nobody has a right over your mind. Nobody has a right over your life. You have the right to make your own decisions. And boys should understand that girls are equal as you are. They're human beings. They have equal right. Their freedom is not your charity. Their freedom is not something that you have to grant. That is a constitutional right. That is the human right. That way, boys have to change. And you're not getting married for somebody to take care of you. I've seen many divorce petitions in the family court here. The girl did not. Even now, they say she did not cook, she did not wash the clothes. These are reasons for filing for divorce. This is the way society still thinks. Boys and girls have to be independent. Like Dr. Sandhya earlier said, you need to cook to survive. You need to clean to survive. These are all life skills that everybody should learn. And girls, before marriage is not the priority in your life. And motherhood and marriage are choices. Even there are many girls in Kerala who do not have the privilege to have rights over their womb. Their mother-in-laws, mothers-in-law decide when should they have children and how many children do they have. So your, childbirth or motherhood is also not somebody else's right. You have right over your body. You need to understand. Be firm and learn to say no. Men should respect that. For you, your self-respect and dignity should be more important than everything else. You should not compromise your self-respect and dignity in front of anybody, whichever space it is. If you become so assertive and ask the men to see you not as sexual objects, not as the bodies that they see, there is much beyond the body and how you use your body is your right. Your sexuality is your choice. What do we do with that? I feel that in heterosexual marriages and when, homosexual marriages get normalized, now we have only decriminalized it. In homosexuality, when you think of alternate forms of marriage and relationships, you will understand maybe this kinds of abuse may reduce. So the thing is that also, so when all these attitudes change, I think gradually we will, be able to think of a system where dowry is not there. Maybe gradually it will reduce. And one more thing, there have been so many Facebook posts and extortions like parents should have asked her to come out. You know how the society still treats a divorcee? Have you thought about how society, like she was talking about the incident of how people were talking about second marriage? I have experiences of that because I am a single mom in my apartment where I live in a city in an apartment on my own with my son since the time he was a child. So there people are scared, are hesitant to make their children mingle with my son because they have a presumption that he is brought up by a single mother. So there's something, there has to be something wrong with him. So that attitude has seen how many single women get divorces, get houses on rent. How much social life has divorcees have in our society? How many are able to talk about it? One lady, Annie Shiva, I don't know whether Dr. Sandhya, Dr. Ruchira are aware of it. This is a story of Annie Shiva. Now she has become an SI, sub-inspector of police. She had to live like a man, cut her hair, and she has to, because the reason she says is she had to run away from predators this way. As a society, you don't let a woman be single. They think that, every man, I would say, most of the married men want to take care of her emotional and physical needs. that hypocrisy, when that is there in this society, it is very difficult. And the legal system has also changed. When I did my LLM thesis on feminist jurisprudence and I was talking to female lawyers, many of them not even aware of it. Many say that even domestic violence act is being misused by women. So there is no gender sensitization in law. There are no female politicians. Just being a woman is not enough. Whether you're gender sensitive, is most of the women and men and male power only let women who are agents of patriarchy get into the system. Otherwise, any space for a woman is an exception. So all these things together, our media, our advertisements, everything, as they reinforce the notion of patriarchy, it is very difficult for us to get out of this. So my request is all of you, like, take strong decisions. Why do we change your name after marriage? Mine is Jyothi Radhika Vijayakumar. Radhika is my mother. My son has my name. My son's name ends with my name. Why don't you have, when you get married, if you want to get married, it's a choice. And if you choose to be a mother, why don't you give your name also as a surname? Why do you change your names after marriage? Why do you change your address? Why do we insist on patrilocality? Why should I stay only in at the man's place? Why can't he come here and stay too? And why you need have your ATM card on your own? You need have property in your own name. And when you get into marriage, think that you have a place to go back to. And don't always think that your family will support you. Family will be there for if there is nobody for you. Stand on your own. You have to stand on your own. That gut, that feeling, that guts, that determination should be in there. And also the legal system has to change, and also the government should set up shelter homes. And this is a very emotional issue and personal thing, so I'll keep on talking about it. But thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about it. It was enlightening to listen to Dr. Ruchira and Dr. Sandhya. Shanthi Mathai, Nasneen, thank you. Wish that at least a few of the students who have been part of this discussion would bring in some change. Otherwise, if 10 of you change, 10 families would change, and it will bring in a lot of change. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Advocate Jyothi, for the very passionate and challenging message. And it was actually asking so much of questions, raising so much of questions on gender stereotyping. So without delaying any more, because we are already running ahead of the time, so let's have some questions from our participants. Quickly, please, come on. We are altogether 31 participants now. I think two questions each to the presenters, the speakers can be there.
Hello, am I audible?
Or any one of you can answer also in general. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, please.
So, ma'am, my name is Sophia. First of all, thanks a lot. This was a very enlightening section, and I'm really a different person right now after this. So, one thing which I felt is, as my personal experience, I would like to share is, we are never, as girls, we are never given a financial education, or what do you say? I have to. Once it was like. I had to go to bank because my savings account, my junior account, had to be changed to now. What do you say? Had to be changed. So I had no clue about the whatever the procedures and everything, and like my dad had to handle it. So, and nobody even like told me what was going on. So I was like completely blank. And even I have seen a video actually saying that. Women generally, they are completely kept on the dark side regarding these issues. So regarding this, so I feel even at that point, like this has grown into like all the spheres of our life, this gender issue, this problem. So I think it's like how all the esteemed speakers over here have said, this has to be corrected in our homes. And yeah, that's it. I just wanted to share this. So thank you.
I have a suggestion because of our limited time. Shall we collect all the questions first and then answer together? Okay.
Okay.
Participants, please go ahead with the questions.
Hello. Uh, I just want to ask a question. Actually, since you've said about the loopholes in the present system, in our legal system, so oh, what do you feel like? What can be done legally to protect or to change, to make a change? So that's one question that came in my mind.
Is that for you? For me, Sophia?
Uh, Anybody can answer. Like, okay, ma'am.
Or Adv.Jyothi? I would I would give in my view since I've started. Loopholes in the law can be changed by correcting the law by way of an amendment and reforming the law. But the problem is about even the law, which is the Dowry Prohibition Act, speaks about prohibition officers. And these officers are given some functions. And number one function which is given to them is create legal awareness of it. So ultimately, uh, in some areas, legislations can work only with exercises like what we are doing right now. So once that is taken care of, the loopholes will become narrower and narrower, and in course of time, it would vanish because empowerment has to happen not just within the written letters of law, but in real implementation of it. For this, of course, a strong political will is required to study the matter and to amend the law. And also, the officers who are to implement the law must be correctly sensitized towards it. And all stakeholders must be taken into confidence, and there has to be participative, consultative process. And then the law has to reform. Over to you,
Okay,
Jyoti.
ma'am.
Or
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Sophia, what I would, and I am not aware much of dowry prohibition law, how it is implemented, but when you talk of family, for example, domestic violence act, after you file a complaint for domestic violence, you come back to the same house and we have a sanctified notion of family. How dare you file a complaint against me? And this family court, even judges and counselors, you will be shocked the way they counsel them. Why can't you adjust? You're a woman. I remember a female judge asking her, you are talking so loud in the courtroom with your husband, and I can imagine how are you at home. These are the prejudices that you carry. And one saddest thing is, you think about maintenance. Most of the custody, we don't have a system of co-parenting. Most of the women have the custody of children, and I have seen mentally challenged children, physically challenged children, husbands who are earning lakhs and rupees, they don't even pay thousands in maintenance. And a woman who gets into the court, who approaches the legal system to address these issues, domestic violence, and she goes through a harrowing experience. And the counselors are not sensitive. Everyone says, you are not adjusting. There's something wrong with the woman. She is arrogant. She's headstrong. She's ahankari. I don't know, both of you will understand the meaning of ahankari. It is like, it's in Malayalam, you say she's so arrogant and headstrong. And the problem is with her. They judge her. Even the system judges her. And I see when they stand in the family court, everyone looks at her as if they've done a criminal thing, some criminal offense. So legal system has to be sensitized so much. Enforcement has to be very clear. Sensitization is very, very important. That is what I feel from my personal experience.
I just want to come in and talk a little bit about the financial education issue that you raised. This is a real issue, and this is a real issue affecting everybody. That women are not trained to handle their finances. And apart from young women, the people who that hurts the most are widows. Because all their lives they have had someone else deal with their finances, and then suddenly, how do I file my taxes? How do I go and get access to the life insurance? I think one way to get around this problem, and I often say this to the finance and banking school also. If you look at any commerce department, BCom or something, you will find a higher proportion of men to women. And if you see any media, any psychology, even economics in India, but not abroad, sociology, English, the ratios are the other way around. I think there is a problem with the way we teach these things. There's a problem with the way we teach finance. There's a problem with the way we teach economics even. And now there is a new movement starting for feminist economics, feminist finance, feminist commerce, feminist statistics, which has started trying to address these problems and try to educate our students in a way that is gender neutral. Because until now it has not been gender neutral. It's very gendered. Even statistics is taught in a very gendered way. So now, now we have time use statistics and we have learned how to also talk about housework as work, how to talk about the value of women's bodies, how they themselves will, recognize their own worth. So these things are changing, and I think that's, even when we start talking about the law, I think it's very important that many of the female students here will become lawyers, will become economists, go into the world of finance. And that's very important. Like say, advocates, Sandhya, Jyothi, all legal scholars, advocates, that gives me a lot of hope today that, I'm able to take my case to someone who will understand. There are actually, India has really amazing women's rights lawyers. There's Brinda Grover, there's Menika Guruswamy, and many others who are, who really help keep the legal system. Um, well, it's never going to. It's not friendly to women yet, but make it a little less hierarchical than it otherwise is.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
a lot for sharing that.
Is there anyone to pose a question? Otherwise, we'll wind up the session.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, I
I have one question.
Yes.
Yeah, no, go ahead, go ahead. I'll ask after
I
that.
was about to tell you that no boy has, spoken till now. Yes.
Please go ahead.
Hello, hello. I had this doubt, like, first of all, I wanted to, like, this talk, I joined very randomly, very casually, and not thinking twice about it. But now I have spent about 2.5 hours, 1.5 hours listening to these women, and like Sophia said, I feel like I'm a different person because the way I see the world has changed a lot. And uh, the question I want to ask is, uh, I had this question for some time, because I started noticing things about these feminist movements, and I started reading about them, and I started talking to the people in my life, the women in my life, and I feel like I'm getting a better understanding of the situation, and I'm able to implement some things in my life. I'm able to make a change, like you said. But the problem starts when I try to share my experience, share my knowledge among my peers, especially male friends, even though they are like really great people who are excellent in their fields and excellent human beings. Even if they acknowledge the issues and the problems that I speak about, after a point the interest wanes. It isn't, it's just a show of I'm a progressive person, so I support this. After a Facebook post or a Instagram story, everything stops. iPhone can't stop there. I feel I felt like I couldn't stop there. But I also don't know how to bring about change in the people around me. And if I feel like a failure if I can't at least talk to the people around me and bring about a change in the people around me. So I wanted to ask everyone here if they have a solution or some tips or something that will help me out.
One of my students had this problem. He actually wrote a really nice article on labor force participation by women using data from the periodic labor force survey. And he was very excited about it. He presented it on an interactive graphical format. Then he followed it up by writing a story on rape, and he built an interactive rape map of India by state and presented it on a website. He was very thrilled. His friends started bringing him down in every way possible. They're like, why are you even talking about these issues? If you have to do journalism, my students are journalism students. They asked him, if you have to do journalism, why are you picking up these issues? You don't have issues of your own. And, he really had to defend himself. And the way he put it out was that, fine, so I'm a man. And, you know, society is certainly, gives me certain privileges. But I have a lot of friends who are women, and I have family members who are women, and I know a lot of people who are women. And I believe that, if uh, a gender equal classroom, a gender equal society is better for all of us. Because, then I get to also learn from other people. Often, like say when I have a 2-year-old son, and usually, everybody tells us that, oh, don't worry, the girls are better developed than him. But he will catch up soon. They never ask what can my boy child learn from the girl children around him. How can he learn ideas of responsibility, of leadership? So there is definitely a role for men and boys to play in making a gender equal society, in partnerships, in relationships, in a classroom, with regard to their female colleagues, and that it's as important for boys as for girls.
Thank you.
Ma'am, can I add one thing to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Rohan, I'm happy that you asked this question. One thing, like you talked about, like here, like especially in the context of Kerala, like women empowerment, we've been focusing more on girls. Girls have changed to an extent, but at the same time, parallelly, we haven't focused on, making bringing in those changes in the boys to accept these changed women. I feel most of the boys are in 18th, 17th century and girls are in 21st century. Whereas in attitude, there's a century, more than 2-3 centuries old gap between men, boys and girls. I think our focus should be more on bringing up gender sensitive boys at home. The thing I've told my 10-year-old son is like, you should not trouble. Your partner could be a boy or a girl if you choose somebody. But if you choose a partner and a girl, if she is bothered because of you, that is the point of our trouble and clash and conflict. I made it pretty clear from the beginning. So I think the focus should be more on bringing up gender sensitive boys, and you don't bother about people who are talking about your life. You show it in your life, you practice it, and you have a happy and very democratic and sensitive interaction with the girls in your women in your life, and they will feel like we should also follow suit because he's having such a wonderful, beautiful relationship with the women around. And second thing, ma'am, like for your also like information, when I go through the social media, what I find, feminism, anti-caste, anti-capitalism, all have become jargons to brand you. It has become a brand. Most of them don't even, for example, I sometimes even feel that feminism becomes a mask for many educated and so-called activists meant to trap women into that. This also happens. The ideology is also being used as cover-up. So that hypocrisy is very much evident. You have to filter it out and understand. That is also a worrying thing.
Rohan, one word to you: communicate. And when you communicate, point out the unfairness. It might click them, maybe for a moment, and could change a bit. And constant reminders: whenever you can communicate, do communicate. And next time, when there's a college program, offer to hand over the bouquet by yourself and definitely not give it to a girl. A small thing,
Yes.
but that's a huge change.
Yes, exactly.
Great.
Ma'am, can you just repeat that? I couldn't hear it properly.
Next
The last point.
time, next time post COVID, when there's a college program and when there are guests, and if you have this habit of giving, asking girls, calling out girls to hand over a bouquet of flowers, offer yourself as a volunteer yourself and say, I would give it. And point it out to your friends that why can't I do it?
Ma'am, here we have tried to
That's
change
great.
these things, even supplying this balloons, no water and all to the audience. We give that to boys also. We entrust that duty to them.
That's very nice.
Okay, thank you so much. And for a quick note, is there anyone any more questions? It was very interesting and
Ma'am, I have a question, ma'am.
okay, yes, if
Um,
the speakers have time,
can I ask, ma'am?
please
I
go
feel
on.
there is a clear-cut distinction about the spheres. We could discuss this women empowerment, feminism, gender roles, gender discrimination, because we can speak about the gender roles. It should be changed in classrooms, being with friends, in college, or in these webinars we can speak, but in family, being with relatives, in get together, or in celebrations like engagement, marriage, we usually pretend that I don't know this gender roles. We become less aware of it, we just ignore. I have to succumb to this, I have to cook, I have to clean. My brother don't want to do this because he's a male. We just ignore it in when we come to another sphere of life, in family, relatives, get together function. But when we come to college with friends, we discuss about gender roles. Yes, it has to be changed. We are only asked to cook, that kind of things we discuss with friends in college, in webinars, in our classrooms. But when it come to another sphere of life, we just simply ignore it, we simply succumb to it. So what can as we do in, if we speak anything, I think we become alienated or ignored or insulted by relatives by saying you are selfish, you are not, you should be not like that. So it has become a difficult situation. So how to handle it?
Well, if your relatives tell you that that you're not being a good girl and that these things are happening, I think the best way is, see, if you really are doing something good in your life, you will annoy some people, and that's fine. That means you're doing something right.
Okay, ma'am.
Well, ma'am, I'm sorry if I'm taking, but one sentence, ma'am. You need to, for example, most of the girls are trapped in the good girl image. Obey parents, obey teachers, obey friends. Break out of the. I think when it comes to gender empowerment and sensitization, being an arrogant girl, being a headstrong woman, nobody who she doesn't obey anybody. That image is more helpful for you in your personal life in breaking these things. Just don't get trapped into this good girl thing. Be good to yourself first. I think that's very important in the present Kerala society.
Marianne, I think my takeaway for you is have clarity, think about it, and be very clear as to why you want to make your point at any point of time, and pass that clarity. It might work. Speak with clarity and bring them that sense. Don't. I would suggest that don't go to argue and establish, because that might not work at a domestic sphere, because the point is we succeed in communicating, and you can work on that by thinking and being clear very much for yourself first.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Shall we move forward? That hello, participants.
Ma'am, can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Have a topic.
So, like, if a woman is financially independent, then could dowry or gift culture be justified?
Even if woman is not financially independent, it is not justified.
It's complicated, it is not justified either way, but the question of value and justification gets very messy. Like, if you're talking, you know small, inexpensive gifts, and or are you talking, car, house gifts? There is also that factor. Then, I mean, in general, it's just completely non-justified. But yeah, I get what you're asking. You're asking, does the value of dowry reduce if the woman is able to provide a stream of income? Uh, According to most research, it is true that value of dowries do reduce when women are earning members. But it's not necessarily true. It's just shown in some anthropological studies. Uh, so yeah, moralistically speaking, of course, we have to reject dowry in every way possible for whoever possible. In the the real world is a world where economics plays a role, finance plays a role, and usually in these worlds, some anthropologists have found that lesser dowry is demanded when women earn. So what? Either way, if we want to end this culture, then we have to look beyond these things.
There is also another side to this, that is like how a boy has to learn cooking as a life skill. A woman, a girl should also think that I will work and I will live. So that has to come. And same is how boys look out for how much of dowry, if at all they look out for it. Similarly, girls also, girls in the sense their family also look out for the job that the boy occupies, how much of property the boy has. These are considerations from both sides. So both this have to stop, and people should decide to work and live, work, earn and live.
Also, we also tend to privilege one kind of work over another. Like being a professor gives you money, so that's a good job. Being a housewife doesn't give you money, so that's not a good job. But the truth is that both are jobs. Both are, in all cases, we are training children, uh, providing care, providing mentorship. So society also needs to develop a way of valuing women's work at home as well. Work that is considered unpaid needs to be given a certain kind of value. There are projects now, particularly in South India, as a matter of fact, for wages for housework movements. I think those should be supported, and at the same time, those by themselves are not very useful policies. So we need a wider policy framework. There's a very beautiful essay by Pavlina Sherneva called The Job Guarantee Through Care. So we've all heard of the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. uh, what if we develop a policy for employment guarantee in care work and provide dignity to the people who are doing this care work? What if we provide conditions that allow women to leave their homes and truly discover their talents elsewhere? What if we provide enough creches, where women can also get work in providing care and consider the work of care work in creches as valuable work, right? Basically, we need to, essentially, that's what feminism is about. It's about building a sisterhood where we recognize, where the empowerment of each one of us empower someone else. Like this happened in Jindal recently. The creche that we were sending our children to, all the employees, the creche had to shut down during COVID because it was run by informal. It was run through an informal channel. It wasn't run through the university. It was outsourced. So the employer fired all the care workers when they started demanding their salaries. Many of us, me included, helped them, get their salary. But the problem was that as soon as they started being too bossy and fighting with the employer, they all lost their jobs. Um, what we then had to do was to organize to get these care workers jobs in various other houses, and that is actually the only reason why I'm able to function right now and attend sessions and do all of this. It's because I was able to ensure good quality, high wage work for the creche workers. And we need to develop more systems like this, where where more and more women are in paid work, they are paid decently for their paid work, and where the task of providing care is given high remuneration. Nurses need to be paid more. In fact, nurses probably need to be paid more to the point that they are able to sustain full families on what they are paid. Presents.
So, one more question if anybody has.
Yes, ma'am, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Like, ma'am, we know that rising bride price has brought increased violence against women, but then the higher classes report fewer domestic violence cases of like violence cases of and dowry gifts. Why is this so?
Uh, Krishnendu, it wasn't clear. Can you repeat the question?
Ma'am, am I audible now?
You are, but could be a little louder.
Little more louder, please.
We know that rising bride price has brought increased violence against women, but then the higher elite classes report fewer domestic violence cases or dowry gifts. Why is this so?
Now, I have not come across a data on. I have not studied the data on this, but domestic violence is very difficult for women. It's continuing to be very difficult for women to report cases. There are so many domestic violence cases all around in all classes. When it comes to, I don't like to use the word higher and lower, but if you go by income and if you go by the income which the job fetches, in that way, when we categorize as top income and lesser income level, the lesser income level, the women tend to take it for granted. The beatings and all that is part because they have seen it, and it becomes part of their life. Probably that is why they don't even think of reporting it. And middle class is the one who always tends to come out more with these things because they have more of they don't belong to either ends of the spectrum, so it's easier for them to come out. And when it goes to the top class, also the cases reported are less, doesn't mean that domestic violence is less. Because domestic violence, the definition itself is very big, wide enough. It need not mean physically harming or beating. It can mean emotional abuse, sexual abuse. All this could happen because there are no income levels for domestic violence.
Ma'am, I have come across a recent report. I couldn't read through it in detail, but it seems that 7 out of 10 married women experience domestic violence. So that's there.
It's also possible that convictions might be low in higher income brackets because they will also file counter cases, right? You file a case, uh, dowry, case of dowry. Somebody else, the person who you file the case against, files another case against you saying that you have lied and you have forged your documents. Then you will file a counter case, and that can often keep a lot of well-off people out of the criminal justice system by intimidating, you know, people who have been harassed with counter suits.
Not sure of that.
If I could add one thing, I don't have exact data on it. I haven't come across, but from the experience in the court and what you see around here, especially in Kerala, the income group and the lower income group, they do not have that much stigma associated with these things, domestic violence and all. The approach could I seen more frequent remarriages and divorce, but the middle class is so conscious of social status and this thing. Middle class here, I'm not sure whether it's right across India, but here it tends to be more covering up these things because marriage is a status thing. So this is what I have experienced.
So thank you so much, Dr. Ruchira, Dr. Sandhya, and Adv.Jyothi. The discussion doesn't end here.
Yeah,
Let this be a beginning
should not.
for a change. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.